All right. Well, departing from Google world here, Kim says, Ben, you haven't posted on fintech in a while, but I thought Apple's recent earnings report had something in it to consider. Services, which includes payments, hit an all-time record as a percentage of overall revenue. On the call, CFO Luca Maestri,
I believe it's
do you know?
Maestri.
Okay. On the call, CFO Luca Maestri didn't break out specifically what they take in from payments, but he did mention the category as seeing notable growth. It seems tap to pay with mobile wallets for both iOS and Android has accelerated since the pandemic. That said, what was once seen as the inroad for new fintech entrants has instead simply locked in the incumbent players, as consumers have loaded their favorite rewards cards into the mobile wallets. And if anything, Apple and Google, via mobile and browser wallets, have reduced the friction for Visa and MasterCard rather than enable the new entrants to go around the traditional card networks. Consumers love their reward cards, and with ZERP now gone, it seems unlikely that the fintech startups will be able to match such generous rewards programs. So where are we in the fintech revolution, and have Apple and Google found the perfect partners in Visa and MasterCard rather than the Valley startups? Ben, do you have any thoughts on the fintech revolution and where things stand right now?
No, Kim is articulating where I didn't write very much about the fintech revolution because I didn't really believe in it. I mean, I did. So
you could foresee this?
Well, yeah. So I'll take a being right point and I'll take a being wrong point on this one. So the being right point was I was always skeptical of any payment replacing credit cards. Actually, when I just made that bit about the Delta having to be much better, I first wrote that on Shohei in the context of credit cards, saying like, look, you're not going to replace this. The reason, credit cards are pretty awesome, and so number one,
and with more scale, you can offer better rewards to people, so it's hard to break in.
People like rewards, right? Yeah, and this is one of those situations. This is actually one of the issues with Sweeney's argument relative to the App Store. One of the issues with the App Store is the argument about consumer harm actually kind of falls apart when you look at it closely. So theoretically, the argument is that because of the 30% premium, developers have to charge higher prices, so consumers are paying more. The reality that we've seen from the App Store is prices go to zero because the reality of massive competition, because there's basically there's limitation on joining the App Store, so competition is massive, is that prices go to zero. So the point that consumers or go to $1 or whatever it might be. So there's actually, it's very difficult to make a justified with numbers argument that consumers are being harmed. This is why actually I think the most damaging case for regulating the App Store was it was several years ago. I can't remember what the case was called, but it relied on the Illinois brick precedent. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not, no.
So the Illinois brick precedent basically said that only one person in the value chain could be liable for an antitrust violation. Like you can't just like keep going up the chain and everyone is sort of liable. Like it sort of stops somewhere. And in this case, it basically was about who is harmed by the App Store. Is it developers or consumers? And the decision was that developers are not harmed because they're downstream from the consumers. It was like analyzing the structure of the market. I thought that case was poorly decided, poorly understood because of the way it structured the market. And it only left the door open for a case being brought based on consumer harm. When, if you're going to bring any successful case for the App Store, I think it needed to be based on developer harm. But that meant you had to get the structure of the market correct. And Apple argued that because they're in between developers and consumers, that developers were like a step removed, and so they weren't whatever, which is like sort of technically correct, but also Apple out of this will turn around and argue the exact opposite, which developers set the prices. They do all these sorts of things. It's developers that are dealing with customers, right? They are absolutely trying to have their cake and eat it too. So that case is actually one of the OG App Store cases. And I think it was a disaster for regulating the App Store because it set a precedent for organizing the structure of the App Store market that meant consumers could bring a case, but not developers. And it's very hard to compile evidence that consumers are actually harmed. Anyhow, the digression here that applies here is,
and that, by the way, that same challenge plays out across antitrust and tech right now.
It plays out right here with credit cards, right? Who is harmed by credit card fees? The merchants are, right?
Right.
I feel this very much. I paid astronomical amounts of money over the 10 years trajectory in credit card fees. Been by far my biggest expense, right? The consumers don't feel that, and it doesn't affect my pricing decisions, to be honest, right? It maybe on the margins, like annual plans versus monthly plans, you actually don't lose as much with the discounted annual plan because you're only charging once, like which reduces your credit card fees. And so
show people how the sausage is made here. Yeah.
Right. And so all this ties into the reason why I've always been extremely skeptical of the credit cards being replaced. Consumers love them. They're super convenient, and not only are the solutions out there not astronomically better, they're usually worse. Like I'm gonna show a QR code or whatever it might be, right? Like, and then Apple and Google, and this was the other part of my thesis, were absolutely going to make credit cards better, and that has succeeded. This is where I have to take the being wrong point. So Apple keeps like a 25 basis points or something of every credit card transaction that is made through Apple Pay, and they just pocket it, right? So you make $100 purchase. Apple takes like, I want to say like 2.5 cents out of that. I might have my decimal point off, but I think that's what it is. And my argument was at this time was that Apple should spend that percentage and give it to merchants to incentivize them to move to new payment terminals that accepted Apple Pay. And because then they could sort of like really dominate this
and
market.
Corner the market, yeah.
And they didn't, and then it seemed like Apple Pay was like really slow, and I'm like, man, Apple just wants all the profit. They should have like actually spent the money here to really make inroads. And that was totally wrong. It did take a while, but we fast forward like approaching a decade, and Apple Pay is increasingly available everywhere. In Taiwan, it's like in part because Taiwan, and this is one of the points I made in that original credit card article, in countries that transition to credit cards later, they're now more advanced just because they came online with newer technology, right? The US was like doing those slider things with credit cards, right? It like that matters because there's a lot of expense that goes into replacing terminals, replacing all these sorts of things, bringing it online. The later a country transitions, the better their baseline of equipment is going to be. But by and large, you can get away increasingly, and it varies on market, with just your phone. You don't need a credit card at all. And Apple is in a phenomenal position in this regard. And guess what? They are keeping those basis points, and they never gave them away. And they were patient, and they waited for the market to come with them. And they were totally right, and I was totally wrong to criticize them for that.
Yes, well, and you also were the first person who taught me how to use Apple Pay in 2021, and
was it that late?
Me really well. It was really, really late, but it's been great ever since. So
just
good
to
for
say,
Apple.
so I just want to make sure I understand. So I introduced you to a wireless Apple technology that you realized was much better, and sort of was
Absolutely. Listen, man, I'm not opposed to Apple making gobs and gobs of money. Apple will be fine. I'm just saying
I'm referring to Apple wireless technology specifically. So you see the allure for credit cards, but you don't see the allure for AirPods. This is, just not to that's stated explicitly.
I thought we were circling back to the App Store and the margin argument. Yeah.
You didn't see that one coming out. That was I picked up the Festivus poll and just sort of banged you upside the head with that one.
Here's the thing. There are real benefits to owning the hardware, a fully integrated experience.
Oh, by the way,
one of the benefits is that you can just impose changes on millions and millions of people who didn't ask to be forced to use wireless technology for the rest of their lives, and then be hailed by nerds like Ben Thompson for decades to come at what a success the AirPods have been, what a thriving business. Luca Maestri and his services revenue is just off the charts these days.
Listen, AirPods are hardware revenue for the record.
That's I know.
But by the way,
as soon as I said that, God damn it.
Apple, I told you have to be careful with your words today, Andrew. I'm all over it.
Festivus, here we are.
That's right. But actually, Apple's control of the NFC chip is wildly anti-competitive in my mind. You like how do you get actual competition in payments? Like, let apps other than Apple Pay use the NFC chip to do wireless payments, right?
That's a great
Europe
point.
is pushing on this point. I think it might be open up. There's something happening in other parts of the world, but like that is a great example of, again, now I haven't dived into the law around this point, but from what should happen, I think Apple's control of NFC is wildly anti-competitive. Like, and I do wish we had more market definitions in line with, like, the reality of the market is there's only two, and if you treat it as some sort of valid competition, then both sides get away with everything. Like this
eternity, yeah.
Right, exactly. So here's another example of
you're not a corporate shell.
I'm not saying it's illegal, is wrong and should be different.